Cool. Well, thanks for having me here, Thatcher. Thanks, Cindy, Ruth, Deborah, for hanging out. Anyone else who views this later on, thank you for your time. I'm not claiming to be an expert on discussion boards by any means, but I found them to be a pretty successful tool, especially in the context of philosophy courses. So what I'll go through quickly will be the nature of online discussion threads, especially as to how I design them in my courses, and discussing some of the motivations as to what might be the benefit for having an online discussion thread in your courses, regardless of the subject matter. So although I'm predominantly teaching philosophy courses, I believe that discussion threads can be of benefit to the sciences, languages, to the arts, as well as even mathematics, I would claim. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. I'll give some examples of online discussion threads that I've used in my particular courses, specifically my intro to philosophy class and my medical healthcare ethics course. And then looking at how the students themselves view these online discussion threads. I have an example of a testimony from a student discussing their own experiences with using online discussion threads. And then I'll consider some potential obstacles to using discussion threads online, which I think is the more interesting component. I think that most of us already know how to use them at some base level, but how to start troubleshooting some of the issues that may arise when we incorporate this particular tool. All right, so this is directly from my own syllabus for Intro to Philosophy. If you notice that all of the discussion posts for the whole class are worth 340 points, that sounds like a lot. Basically, all my classes are out of 1,000 points. It's really just 100 points with a 0 added. There's just something psychologically beneficial to the students if they see an assignment worth 10 points rather than 1 point. So that's really just more of just psychological trickery. So typically they'll be posting 2 times a week in my classes. So it'll be worth 20 points for that week. Really, that's just 2 points. And so you can do the math pretty quickly. So here I say in my syllabus, the description that philosophical thinking is a skill and involves having continuous conversations. I would say that pretty much all of learning involves having continuous conversations both within and outside the classroom. So for this reason, it's imperative that students do not submit everything on the day that assignments are due. So I use Canvas quite a bit for all the assignment submissions. So rather than having the students submit everything on Sunday, that I encourage them to post one thing, say on Tuesday, another thing on Thursday, another thing Saturday and Sunday. I'll talk about the pedagogical benefits of that in just a moment. Instead, you are encouraged to post different discussions and responses on different days of the week. So posting your initial post on one day, leaving it alone, and then coming back on another day and replying to students on that different day. That allows for some time to pass between the initial posting and the reply, which means that there's some of that background processing happening, thinking about the prompt, the material, what they had said, allows more opportunities for other students to have posted. And what I've seen is that their second post responses to students are much more refined positions than when I allowed for them to be posting and replying on that same day. You avoid what I call glibness. So it's an online community, so even if you have a face-to-face class, the online Canvas space is still an online community itself. So I assess students more so on the quality of their submissions, particularly the ways that they help make connections between the material presented in the course and their everyday lives. This is an opportunity for students to make connections between what I'm teaching them in the class and things that are happening either in the cyber realm, which most students already are, as well as what they have going on in their day-to-day experiences. And further develop the conversation. So they're really assessed in their abilities to not just assess one or the other, but how well do they move the conversation forward? How well have they advanced the conversation? Have they given a contribution to someone? I have the students use what's called the principle of charity. So I require the students to summarize what they've read from someone else. So they have to present what they take to be the other student's argument or position. They can't just say, good job. Instead, they have to say, I hear you saying this. This is what I think is good about it. This is what I think is wrong. Here's something that might help out your discussion a little bit later on. So they're really more so helping each other out develop better posts. So in doing that kind of assessing with each other, then in many ways, their own posts become better because they think, well, what would someone expect of my own post? Such that in giving this recommendation, I would incorporate it for myself. So some of the benefits are that we meet students where they already are in having online discussion threads. We've got millennials. I'm technically an elder millennial. So count myself as part of this group, as well as tech-native students who have basically grown up with exposure to the internet or online communities as it is. So by bringing the conversation online, we're in many ways going where the students already are quite a bit. So when students say, oh, online discussions are so much work, I tell them, you're already online. So rather than you talking on Facebook with people about something, why not talk to people in the class who have a similar background as you in this context and develop a better understanding of the material? So I think that this is a nice tool. And I see students posting 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. I generally reply to them and say, shouldn't you be asleep? Don't you have something better to do on a Saturday night than post to your philosophy class? But the fact is that they're already going to be online at that time, so why not allow them opportunity to explore and be thinking about the class material? I do in my syllabus tell them that they have to be posting sober. Just on a Saturday night, shenanigans might happen, and want to avoid that. Yes, yeah, yes. That's why my phone number is no longer on my syllabus. Yeah, when you teach philosophy, people think that you teach psychology, and so they want to share with you everything that's going on in their lives. I also think that in the classroom setting, that sometimes the students aren't always on. They might be fatigued, tired, have come from one activity to the other. So by allowing an online environment, you allow for students to choose when they're posting to the online discussion thread, which indicates that first, they want to be posting, that they're taking some initiative there. I mean, granted, they may be doing it only for the points, but they recognize that they're doing it for the points. They're making that concerted choice or effort. That allows for students to not just be trying to say something for the sake of saying it, that they're able to be at their best, fresh, have their notes out. And I think that's a benefit. Furthermore, this enhances the quality of responses because in a classroom, the conversation might be cut short, whereas in the online environment, they can really develop their ideas. They can reflect upon it. So the quality of the posts are, I think, quite better than the responses in the classroom setting. And especially in philosophy, they get more time to think about it. And philosophy is not a quick activity by any means. We're still talking about things from 500 BCE. So it's okay to go slowly. That's something I encourage the students, is that it's better to have a high quality thought than to just give some thought to it. And the online space creates that opportunity. I think it's also more inclusive. In the classroom environment, you might have that same group of students who are always talking, wanting to give input, whereas in the online environment, the introverted student, the one who's shy, uncomfortable speaking, or doesn't know what to say in that moment, they have a place or a forum to make a contribution. So I believe with regards to ideals of inclusivity, this contributes to that. But with that in mind, it also contributes to diversity in the fact that each student gets exposed to more perspectives. They can read all these different views on something. Each student has a different background, different experience. The online environment allows for them to bring that background experience that maybe would have been missed in the classroom setting. So I think this is a pretty positive forum for some overarching ideals of inclusivity and diversity. With the quality component, the fact that students can type up their response or the post without having to publish it immediately. They can come back, revise, edit, provide citations, and which I do require my students to include citations if they reference additional work. It's an academic exercise, so give credit where credit is due. But with that in mind, they can check other resources. So all the online discussion threads, I encourage them to use the text, use their notes, tell them, look on these different websites, try to make as many connections as possible. There's plenty of evidence indicating that the more connections that you make with what you're learning, the better you're going to understand it, and the longer that you'll have an understanding of that material. So it helps out with long-term retention, which I think is one of the overarching goals of teaching, that we're not teaching just for a test or just for that semester. We want them to develop skills that they're going to take with them in the long run. Allowing them to make more connections with material helps promote that particular goal. Then also, a concern with just face-to-face sessions is that there may be a time when you have 5 days in between class meetings. So if all the material for the class just happens in the classroom, if you have a Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, which we do here, that means between Wednesday and Monday, a lot of time has passed. Similarly, between Thursday and Tuesday, a lot of time has passed. So by allowing the online space for discussions, that means that they're revisiting the material. And a lot of evidence indicates that people retain information better, are able to recall it more readily, when they're exposed to that material more frequently, but at shorter durations. So it's preferable to spend 5 different days on the material, 30 minutes each, rather than spending 2 hours in one day on that material. And again, if our goal is to get them to understand this material for the long run, this contributes to that intention. So these are some examples. I know that's really, really small. Let me go ahead. So this is an example of an online discussion post for my Intro to Philosophy class. They were discussing the question, what is the mind? The mind-body problem. So they're reading some Descartes, some Nagel, Ned Block, John Searle. And the question is, what is the mind? All right, so that's not a very easy question to answer online post. So what I've done here is I've created a template to help them answer this question. So I tell them be sure to identify the theory that they happen to agree with most. So rather than having to come up with their own answer, I'm asking them to either agree or disagree with different positions. And then I ask them to construct arguments. So your argument should also explain why you do not accept one of the other theories. So I've provided the template here in premise and conclusion form. So premise 1 is that some major theories of mind include X, Y, or Z. So those might be 3 different theories of mind. So you might have substance dualism, functionalism, logical behaviorism. And those are the 3 that they maybe want to evaluate. They then have to explain why there are good reasons for not accepting one view, but they have to support that position. There are good reasons for not accepting the other, and there are good reasons, however, for accepting that third alternative. Therefore, they believe that that's the best job of explaining what the mind happens to be. So essentially like looking at options, assessing those different options, so it's a good critical thinking activity. The form of this argument is actually called disjunctive syllogism, so basically looking at disjunctions and ruling out those alternative options until you have the final view that you agree with. Then on a different day, so notice here I have 2 different due dates. So they have to post the first one by, in this case, February 15th, and then they have to have a reply by February 17th. I tell them that they can submit early before those due dates. That's not a problem, but it has to be on 2 different days. This is one problem with Canvas, though, is that in the calendar, it doesn't allow for you to set those 2 different due dates. So that's one obstacle that I haven't been able to resolve yet. I've been on the chat boards with Canvas, and a lot of other people say, yeah, that's a problem. But I'm like, okay, so what's the solution? So this is what I've done to make it a solution, is just typing it into the assignment itself and telling the students they have to just get used to that pattern of every Friday and Sunday there's an online discussion post. And they've done really well with that. So then the reply directly to another student and analyze the student's argument by doing the following. First, state if you either agree or disagree with the student's conclusion. That way they have to share, this is the student's conclusion. So that demonstrates an understanding of the material that's being assessed. They have to assess if they agree or disagree with it. So if they agree with the student's conclusion, state if you agree with each of the premises as well. So partly a critical thinking technique is to identify the argument, the respective premises, and determine if you think that each of those premises is either true or false. If a premise turns out to be false, then the argument is likely bad. There might be an alternative true premise out there that would help their argument, but at that present moment, that's not the best argument available. If you disagree with one of the premises, explain why you don't agree with the premise, but why you still agree with the conclusion. So recognizing that you can maybe have a true conclusion, but with a false premise. If you agree with each of the premises, is the argument similar to your own? And if it is different, then determine if your argument is consistent with the student's argument and if they've done a better job. Should you be persuaded of what they've communicated there? So that's one example. So this is just visually 2 posts. And I think you just can see visually just the quality of the post. By providing them with that kind of template, they've really outlined each aspect. So some major theories of the mind include substance dualism, epiphenomenalism, and materialism. Substance dualism is illogical to me because it views the relationship between mind and body as 2 completely different entities. So they actually go on and explain clearly what that particular theory is, why they reject epiphenomenalism, and then why they end up defending materialism. So materialism makes sense to me as it is the most observable and easy to study. I disagree with that, but the point is that they're providing reasons as to why they're endorsing that view. And then the student over here has a response. I enjoy reading your views on substance dualism, epiphenomenalism, and materialism. So they looked at the different theories that this person has considered. You have very respectable arguments on why, so they're being polite. They're engaging in disagreement with each other, but they're doing it in a civil way. So this is a way to model civil discourse. I agree with the statement on just because we can't observe, so they give an example. Your quote seems to me to be a decent argument on how that view is flawed. While I relate mostly to the view of functionalism, it can be a materialistic or non-materialistic view, and I can relate to the materialist part of it. So this person had advocated for functionalism instead of materialism, but is recognizing that materialism can be consistent with functionalism, and they're sharing that. So that's a really good, high-quality post and response to each other, partly in line with having that template in place. So it makes it look like it's really meticulous, very detailed, but you get these kind of results, students who are thinking. So we have to guide the students in how to have these conversations. Another example, so this is from my medical ethics class, that you can embed videos for them to view and watch. This helps out with them understanding how to use online resources, how to determine what counts as a good quality resource. So this contributes to a digital literacy piece, thinking about what counts as good information online and what's bad information online, so you can set examples for them. This is a good website to understand this particular phenomenon. Here's a bad one. What I had done in this exercise, we were looking at genetic modification, specifically the CRISPR-Cas9 technique. And what I did was I provided them a snippet from the film Gattaca in the 1990s, which, science fiction film and about genetic modification. And I showed them how we can essentially do everything that's being portrayed in the film Gattaca now, using this CRISPR-Cas9 technique. And what I have here is a little documentary on that particular technique, how to splice DNA into RNA and RNA, and then slice from those components out that might be bad, so a cancer gene or something like that, and then put them back together to allow for a modification. And then a real-world case in which this was recently done in China, and the two children were born after having this technique applied that would prevent them from developing HIV. And so I allowed for the students in this class to assess whether or not it was morally permissible for this particular doctor to genetically modify and implant those embryos. So it's a real-world case. You can see the news story. You're able to relate it to how it was portrayed initially in sci-fi, and then the actual technique now. And then they have to do the same kind of response to the other student as well. So it's an opportunity to make connections to things that they're likely to already be reading. The CRISPR-Cas9, CRISPR babies was a really big headline in the news, but we want to make sure that they're getting accurate information. So we should teach them these underlying principles that are being used or told in the stories in the media. I also have some other digital literacy pieces, teaching them how to actually read the news, how to go to news.google.com in particular, how to identify a particular headline, and then going to view more resources so they could see that same story being discussed from different perspectives. And then I teach them how to go through the history and the timeline of the news presentation until they can get to the original report itself. So oftentimes, especially in healthcare ethics, they end up reading reports from the Center for Disease Control, National Institute of Health, and so on. So that's another example. How have students responded to this? I had one student write, I enjoy reviewing morally gray cases that are supposed to cause disagreement and how ethics should handle them. I understood that my position about the CRISPR-Cas9 case, so that Dr. He Jiankui, would be controversial and not agreeable to some, but I greatly enjoyed the opportunity to talk about it and consider why it might not be as bad as some people say it is. So students enjoy talking about controversial topics in this environment. They don't feel that they're being put on the spot, whereas in a classroom, especially a philosophy classroom, we talk about quite controversial issues, that students feel nervous, so the emotions get in the way of their abilities to speak or think clearly. And in the online environment, the veil of the screen, so to speak, allows them to be more comfortable with actually presenting their views in a more coherent fashion. So I hope that in some online discussions in the future, we get to formulate a stance based on ethical principles and defend them from our peers while trying to poke holes in others' arguments. They'll actually do this later on in the assignment, but I'm just holding their hand through this part of the semester, so that way they, it's kind of training wheels for thinking in some sense. I don't want students just right away, going at it argumentatively. But what this shows is that the students are getting excited about this kind of activity. They've told me in student evaluations that this is what they enjoy most about the class, having the opportunity to see what their peers think, having the opportunity to present their own views. And I'm not participating in these discussion threads. I'm just an observer. I just serve as a moderator. I tell them, this is your space. I give them feedback in the grade book on what they can do differently, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But that's their space. It's kind of their playground, but it's moderated, so in that way it's a safe space for them to discuss potentially controversial issues. So some obstacles to this. Well, this is a lot of work. So the grading component, some things that help are rubrics in place. Particularly, I assess them on, are they using the concepts correctly? When they talk about something like functionalism, and I ask them, anytime you use one of the terms, you need to explain what it means so I can assess for them, are they using this concept correctly? The rubrics are helpful there. I assess them for their arguments. So is it actually a valid argument? Is there a false premise in there somehow? I sometimes give group comments. So sometimes in the classroom setting, I'll report back, these are the patterns of error that I had observed. This is what I would recommend to do differently to ensure that that pattern isn't reinstantiated. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll just choose half the class to give really detailed comments to. And then the next time I'll switch. So I'll alternate between groups. That's something that's helpful. And then when I give the comments, I make sure to tell them one thing that they did well and one thing that they need to improve upon. So I want to give them a carrot and some motivation. Saying like, hey, look, you've got this part down. Why don't you work on this part for the next time? And I've had students reply and say, you always find something wrong. I'm like, there will always be something wrong. In my work, there's always something wrong. But what we have to do is find a way of how to make it better, how to improve. So if I were to just say good job, that's not going to help them become better students, better thinkers, more active citizens. Instead, by saying, look, you're doing well in such and such way, but this is what you can do next time. So that's what I think takes care of the grading component. Timing, again, the students are going to have to be attentive to due dates outside of the regular class meeting times. So instead of trying to communicate to them, just spend maybe 15 minutes on the discussion thread, copying it down, just looking at it for maybe 15 minutes, and then thinking about it for a day, and then responding the next day. So this is a time management key, which is really important for students. One concern might be plagiarism. So one, in helping them learn how to do academic writing, I require citations. So anytime that they use an online source, I usually send them to owl.purdue.edu, the online writing lab, for how to provide citations for websites. So that's a good skill for them to develop. If they are quoting from some other student, then they need to say that other student had said this. So giving credit where credit is due. Also, there's an option in Canvas that allows for you to prevent students from viewing any posts before they themselves have posted. I think that's a really useful technique. When I was at another institution, I had problems with students just copying and pasting parts of other students' posts. That was interesting, to say the least. But I think those are two ways of overcoming the plagiarism issue. But really, the plagiarism issue is no different from plagiarism that we have in papers. So just making sure that we're reading the material, making sure that students don't think that this is just busy work, that by being involved with the comments in the grade book, they know that you're watching, so they're going to be more attentive to what they produce. One concern might be glib responses, such as good job. So having them post on 2 different days is helpful because they aren't going to get burned out. I mean, that initial post, that was a lot of mental work. So having a student reply to another student in that same day, they're not going to be as attentive as they were to their initial post. So saying, good job on your first post, take a break, come back to it on another day when you're fresh again. Re-engage the conversation. So that's helpful to ensure that you have high quality responses. And then word counts are helpful too. I generally say at least 250 per post. So their initial post needs to be 250, the reply to someone else, which means then that there's at least writing 500 words per week. And students can always practice writing. I mean, I can use some practice in writing as well. So it's good, I think, to avoid the glib response component. Some concerns might be that this is subject specific, that this is only for literature courses, for philosophy classes, any opportunity for having a debate. And I believe that any field can use information from the news. If you go to news.google.com, on the left-hand side, it has different areas, everything from sports to entertainment to technology to science, mathematics, and top news. So any subject can be covered in a news story itself. So you can incorporate that into these online discussion threads, such that, read the story, give an assessment of it. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? There's op-ed pieces in the news about everything from mathematics to the sciences to languages, even education. I sometimes use those as prompts because I think it's good for students to think about their own education. So this is a new education bill being passed. Do you think that's a good or bad idea? Allows for students to understand the system that they're a part of. So I think that you might have to be more creative than other cases to create a good discussion thread, but there's plenty of online resources of how to get them to view movies through YouTube, listen to podcasts and reply to those, as well as the news in general. So I think that any subject or any discipline would be able to use these techniques.